All right. How about now? Can everybody hear me? All right. So, does anybody here have any programming experience already? I just want to get a kind of a quick show of hands. And what programming languages are you working with, and how long have you been doing this? Okay, so we're going to kind of start from the ground up, and this should be really approachable. And so this language that we're working with, JavaScript, there's a notation that we can use that's actually used as a data format to go back and forth between usually the browser and a server, and even servers use this to communicate between each other. We'll build on top of that each week, and we'll get into programming using the JavaScript programming language. And then when we get into UI development, we'll get into HTML. And so once you kind of understand those languages, you'll be able to move on and do things like build websites. But I think that this will be a fun way to kind of build on things, and we can get kind of immediate gratification. So if you're playing Minecraft, the development we're going to have to do on Windows, because currently the Java edition is the only thing available for Mac or Linux if you happen to be using Linux. 9 days of programming. Well, I mean, that's a start. It's working your way, right? Every day you're going to build on it. So we're going to use the Windows 10 edition, which is also known as the Bedrock edition or Pocket edition. We're going to use that mainly because I think it's more approachable to learn programming starting this way. As well as at the end of all of this, I'll have a server up for everybody where we'll deploy the add-on that we build, and you can play it on your mobile device. And if you have ideas for our add-on, because I want to do this weekly, where we'll start out building foundational concepts, but we'll move into actually building an add-on from start to finish. We'll design an entity, things like that. So if you have ideas, throw them at me. I'll archive this video to YouTube, so if you have ideas later, comment on the video, and then we'll start kind of compiling that for what our add-on should do. So one thing that you should have is a code editor installed. I recommend Visual Studio Code. It's completely free. You can edit these files using something like Notepad, but having syntax highlighting and things tell you when your code is formatted incorrectly and things like that is going to be much more beneficial. So I'd recommend installing that. I already have it installed. So if you find that this is not as approachable, how do you get it? So there's a website, code.visualstudio.com. I'll drop the link in the chat for everybody. And now this is going to be installed on your computer. This isn't for the mobile device. The development will actually have to take place on your computer. So we're going to get started with this. So the first thing to look at when we're talking about Minecraft add-ons is there are two types of add-ons that we can have. So we have so this is going to have to be done on a computer, not on a tablet. So there's two types of add-ons. We have resource packs, and a resource is going to define like what something looks like, right? Yeah, you can click the link if you're on a Windows computer. So And then we're going to have a behavior pack. And a behavior pack is going to talk about how this thing works, how it behaves with the environment. Can you feed it? What loot does it drop? Things like that. So in this particular stream, we're going to start with behavior packs, just because I think we can get started on it much faster. And we can do a lot of really fun and interesting things once we do that. So 2 additional things. I'll drop links inside of the chat that you may find interesting are the this is the links that I just dropped in the chat are for the vanilla resource pack and the vanilla behavior pack. And what these are is you're going to find the configuration files, the JSON files for all of the items and entities that exist in the game already. And we're going to use this as reference to kind of do what we're looking at. So if we open up one of these, I'm going to go into my downloads. I have the vanilla behavior pack. We can see a bunch of folders here. So we've got the entities folder with a bunch of JSON here. And so we could open up, say, a chicken. Now this looks really, really kind of crazy and unmanageable, but we're going to break down what you're looking at here kind of piece by piece, and then you'll be able to start editing kind of anything that exists in the game. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to close this out. I'm going to drop a directory inside of the chat. This is where you're going to put your plugins that you're working on. And so inside of here, we can just paste that in. Or if you'd prefer, I can show you kind of how to walk through this directory structure through the folders. We just have to kind of go in and show some hidden folders. I suppose we could do that this way too. So I think the trouble that you're having is that you're trying to load this stuff up on an iPad and not on like a Windows computer. So inside this folder is going to be our behavior packs. If we come up one level, we also have where we can put the resource packs that we're working on. So in order to create a new one, we need, I'm just going to open this whole directory inside of my editor. So what are you having trouble loading up? Okay, so this is just the 2 development mods, and anybody who has questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat, and we'll kind of sideline and talk about that. And if there's no questions, I'll sort of move on through the kind of curriculum I have here. So if you want to create a mod, okay, so down here, you've got your folder icon, and you click on that, and up here is where you paste that long string that I just put in the chat. Okay, so inside this folder, we need a couple things. We just need an icon, which can be any PNG, and we're just using the same one that's in that vanilla pack that we downloaded. Remember, this is just all the existing entities and items that exist. And then we need a manifest file. And the manifest file is just going to describe what our add-on is and a name. Then we have this unique identifier called a UUID. And we actually use that a lot in programming because this is a globally unique identifier that nobody can have. It can't ever be generated twice. And we're going to use, you can just use this website here, uuidgenerator.net, and we can tell it that we need 2 UUIDs, and then we'll get those, and that's what we can use for our UUID for our add-on and for our module. And we'll talk a little bit more about these when we get into kind of creating resource packs and things like that. For now, you can just copy this from the vanilla pack and change out the UUIDs to your own. So this file format looks a little wild and crazy, but let's break it down because it's going to become more helpful when we start looking at modifying entities and things. So I'm just going to open up a new file here. So this is in a format called JSON. So this is actually valid JavaScript, but we use it as a structural language where a computer program can easily interpret it so that we can parse it. So when we look at this, we have a couple of data types. We have strings, and these are words or collections of words. So that my cool add-on would be a string, and we wrap those in quotation marks to show the start and end of it. We have numbers. Numbers can be in the format of 1, or we can have decimals. We have Boolean, and that means there's only 2 possible values here. So we can either have true or false. We have null, and this is a really interesting case that we don't really need to look too far into right now, but null basically means it doesn't exist. And the reason for this is does everybody here know what a variable is? And I'll just give kind of a second here. So I'd love this to be interactive, so please throw in questions and things like that. So a variable is basically a bucket that we can call by its name that can store a value in it. So if I asked you a true or false question, did you steal the thing from the store? I might store the true or false value there. However, what if I didn't ask you the question? If the variable can only hold true or false, it doesn't represent the fact that it was never asked. Is it actually false because you said it's false, or is it false because I never said it? So we'll look at that a little bit more later. So now we have an array. Now we talked about a variable being able to hold a value, one of these things. An array can hold a collection of these things. So it's like a bucket for all of these to go in. And all we need to do to create an array is these brackets, which you can find next to the P key on your keyboard. And inside of there, we're just going to put, say, our numbers, 1, 2, 3, and separate them by comma. No comma after the last one. Then we have an object, which is a different way of grouping these things together. And we'll use that to kind of pass data around that makes sense. So as an example, we could say a user. Okay, so an object is kind of wrapped in these curly braces, which you're going to press Shift and the same keys next to your P keyboard. And then in here, we're going to use a string for a key that represents the specific property on that object that we want to gain access to. Then we use a colon, and then we can set the value. So my name is Eric. And then if we have additional properties, we're going to separate them by comma, the same way we do with an array. And we can say age. Age. And this is a number, and I am 36. Okay. Does this make sense to everybody so far? Okay, so this is basically everything you need to understand about how the format of these files look like, and even defining values and variables and things like that inside of JavaScript. We're going to be using this same stuff. So this particular object here, once we understand these, all we have to look at is that these things can now be nested. So I could have a collection of users, right? Or we can have say let's say games I like to play. I could have an array of strings on there. Minecraft, right? Which thing are you trying to open? Okay, so we could separate these. Oops. And that would break because it's not under quotation marks. And I could be spelling Fortnite wrong. I actually do not play Fortnite. So then we could also put an object under here. Resume, I don't know, right? Does this make sense so far? We're just kind of nesting these things inside of each other. Okay, so now let's look at kind of this directory structure here at the vanilla behavior pack, which is the one we downloaded that had all of the examples. Now remember to use that string I gave you so that you put your pack in the same place. What you're seeing in this sidebar here is those two folders inside of that app data directory. And I'll put, when I archive this to YouTube, I'll put all of these things in the description so that you can easily find them. Okay, so now we kind of understand these types. Let's break down, well, okay, so let's look at the directory structure first. So inside of this main directory inside of our mod, we have a directory for entities, and you can see a .json file for each of our entities. We have items. We have loot tables, so we can come in here and we can look at a loot table for a bat as an example, and it looks like a bat gives us nothing. We'll kind of drill down into this a bit more. So equipment and then gameplay. And then we also have recipes, scripts, and spawn rules. So we're going to take a look at a couple of them. Let's look at a pig, for example. And we're going to copy this into our mod because we're going to start playing with some stuff. So this looks really, really overwhelming, but I'm going to break it down kind of to much smaller pieces. So up here at the top of our object, right, we just have a couple keys that represent the version, and this is the version of this JSON spec that we're using. Then we have a Minecraft entity property, which inside of it just has a description. This is a unique identifier that represents our pig from any other pig in the game, whether or not this can be spawned, whether or not it's summonable, and if it's experimental. So far we have our property, and then we have a few here that kind of just describe our file. After that, you'll see that we have component groups as a property. You'll see that we have components as a property. And then you'll see that we have events. Now, I'm going to break this down starting from the bottom because it'll make more sense this way. So events can be triggered. We can trigger an event, and the game can trigger an event. And these are sort of messages that are passed between things in the game to trigger some sort of action. So did I grow up? Did I age? Right? Did I explode? Things like that. And then that'll allow us to do things, namely adding component groups, but we'll kind of get there. So components are individual properties on our entity defining how it behaves. And if you go to this site, bedrock.dev, we're able to find documentation for this. And also, if you need help, you can click on that Discord link. If you're on Discord, there is an entire Discord community for Bedrock scripting. So we are currently running version 1.14 of the game, so we're going to look at the docs here. So if we come under the entity events, we can see some of the events and information about this. We're not going to get into animation and stuff in this episode. We will later. We'll keep going through all of this. What we're interested here is in the entities documentation. And inside here, we can click on these things. So this property allows a mob to attack by running it, right? We've got defend trusted player, whether or not it can interact with a door. So these are all different properties. And one of them that we are going to play with is explode. Because I think that we can't do this without making something explode. Okay, so that's our components, how we kind of define how things interact. Now we have component groups. And a component group is a way of collecting components so that we could put, let's look at a chicken. A chicken would be a good example, right? So we've got a component group we just called is it a baby? And then we have a component called scale, setting the size of this baby, and this is basically setting the baby to half, giving it a component that allows it to age, how long it takes to age, the things that we can feed it. Again, this is just an array, right? With comma separated values. And then when it grows up, we are going to send this event to this target. But you notice how all of this is kind of grouped underneath this chicken baby. So what this allows us to do is add and remove groups of components together as one. Does that make sense? So now that we kind of understand what we're looking for here, let's start playing around with some Minecraft. Let's see. And for some reason, it looks like it does not want to load. While I'm working on this, feel free to ask questions that you have about kind of this directory structure, any of the individual kind of specifications for these objects, as well as questions about just Json and things like that. Sounds like we have a lot of thunder here. Let's hope my internet stays. Okay. So if we go under play, we're going to delete this world because I was showing my son some stuff I could do yesterday, and we blew up a lot of stuff. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and create a new world. And we'll leave all of this stuff set. There is two things we're going to do. So the first thing we want to do is we want to use the experimental gameplay. And that's just because some of this stuff in the scripting API we're using is going to require that. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to activate cheats. And we're just going to do this so that if we can't find our pig, that we can summon one. Okay, so over here on the left-hand side, we can see resource packs and behavior packs. If we click that, if you had created that folder and that manifest file inside of your inside of that directory that I linked out, you'll see yours in here. We can just click activate, and then we have it in there. Now, oops. Experimental. Okay, so right now our add-on isn't doing anything. So we're going to start playing around here, and if you can think of some ideas that we should do, if there's something we can quickly do, I am happy to show that off. Right now we're just generating our world. So let's take a look at some looting tables first. So if we go under our looting table, we can look at our entities, and we're going to find our pig. So this is the looting table for a pig, and we can see that there's a pool that it's going to select from when we kill it. How many rolls, which means how many times are we going to just to look and decide which of these items that we're going to give the person who killed the pig. Its type, the name, so it's in this case it's a pork chop. And then we have a weight. Now what the weight is the lower the number, we can think of it as being lighter. So the bigger the number, the heavier it's going to be. So when we roll the dice to figure out which of these things we're going to give you, the things that have less weight are more likely to be given. And then we have some of these additional functions, which we're not going to get into too much detail in this particular episode. But in this case, we've got a function that's running called setCount. These are parameters that are going to go to that, a minimum of 1 and up to 3. And these are some additional options. So if we just copy this, oops. We're going to come into our mod, and we're going to go to the loot table and entities. We're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it pig.json. And inside here, we're going to paste that whole thing, except we are going to delete everything inside this entries so that we are left with just this. That's the pools. And wait, what am I missing? Oh, we're missing a closing curly brace here. Okay. So I think, let's look over here. We have a type, name, and weight. We're going to copy those properties here. And then we see this little error here because the last item in the list does not get a comma. So we're going to put the weight at 1. And I think that when we kill the pig, we should get a diamond sword. So this happens to be the identifier for a diamond sword in the game. So we're going to go ahead and save this. Now, in order to load your changes, you are going to have to save and quit each time. you do not have to close Minecraft. You just have to exit your world. Then when we go back into So I did find an extension for VS Code with some of these schemas. I have not played with them a ton. I think that no, it doesn't look like it's working. I might have it installed on a different computer. But yeah, under this tab here for extensions, you can look for Minecraft. And there are some people who have created language support and things like that so that you get additional features inside your editor when you are editing it. Okay. So now we are in, and we need a pig. So we're just going to summon one. And here's our pig. And if we kill it, he's running away from me. And we get a diamond sword. But I think we can do better. Now let's look back in here. So we've got it dropping a diamond sword when we kill it. Let's modify the entity. And this is so this is going to be based off of this layout we said. So it's going to look like a really, really big file. Are we inside? We're inside loot tables. Okay, so entities. Let's pick on our pig some more. So here is the default behavior for a pig. And we're going to mess with it a little bit. So let's go ahead and copy the contents of it. And we're going to go into our entities, and we're going to create a new file called pig.json. And we're going to paste all of that in there. So the key thing here is if we look at the top, this identifier, the fact that we're calling it a Minecraft pig overrides the Minecraft pig that exists. And when you're looking at your world and your behavior packs, the order of these matter. So you need to order them so that this overrides the default gameplay. Okay, so we have our pig in here. And so now let's see what we should do here. We can see inside of our list of behaviors that we have a Minecraft scale. I believe there's a button there. I've seen it. I think if you have actually, yeah, if I activate the vanilla one, then you can see this button right here where I can move it down, or this one where I can move it up. Okay, so we can see in this documentation, and I can't tell you how important this documentation is, because we can look at existing entities and how they behave. Like, how does a creeper explode? Why does it do that? And we can look at these files to determine how that is and copy it, which is very good. But learning to read documentation is so important as you learn to program, because you'll constantly be interacting with APIs and you'll want to understand how they work, and you may find things that are available that you didn't know existed. So inside the documentation, we have the Minecraft scale property that we can set. It says it sets the entity's visual size and its parameters. We have a value parameter and its type is decimal. So we could copy it from here, or just looking at Where's our adult? Pig adult. Okay. So we don't technically have to even look at that as an example if we don't need to, right? We know that we have a component called Minecraft scale. We separate that with the key now. It's an object. It's not the last one on the list, so we need to put a comma there. And then we know that there's a value property that we just saw. And I think that we should make the pig, I don't know, 8 times as big. We save that. Oh, this is an adult anyway. Now if we go in and play, we were kind of in a little wooded area here, so we're going to have to just spawn one. Or summon one, rather. So let's summon a pig. And there is our gigantic pig. Another fun thing we could do is inside of here already, I know that there's, so this is, if we look through the properties, we can actually kind of figure out how this thing works. So at our adult pig, there's a little bit of math in here and JavaScript we'll talk about later, but this is deciding how much experience you should get when you killed it. This is our scale that we just created. Let's move that out of there. Here's the loot. This is how it knows where to find the loot table for this pig when we kill it. We want it to be able to breed. You'll notice in a lot of these components, there's a priority. And what the priority does is, if you think about, say, a pig, right? Well, it may be set to just wander around. But if you attack it, it panics and it runs. Well, now it kind of has 2 things it's supposed to do, and how does it decide which one of those things goes first, right? So that's what the priority tells it, is when it has multiple components, which thing should it favor more. We've got the breedable component, and it tells us which type of animal it breeds with and what the type of baby is, and we could play with this too, right? And then when the new entity is born, we're going to throw an event and we're going to send it to the baby entity, not to the parent. And here's the items we need to breed. We can look at what happens when it's unsaddled, what happens when it is saddled. It looks like the loot table changes when it's saddled. So we kind of have some of these things. Now here's the components that are always on it. So in the interest of time, I probably won't get into some of the stuff like spawn rules today. But spawn rules, if you look at, you can figure out how to make your entity spawn in different places. So if we look through here, it's walking, leashable. Now we have panic. I think this will be a fun one to mess with. So we all know that if you hit the pig, it panics and it runs away. So I think we should just make this a really big number. And then we're going to come in here and see what happens. All right, let's summon a pig again. Oh, it gets much better. Oh, I guess it died too quick. All right, so here's where I think we can start having a lot of fun. So if we look at a chicken, we know a chicken lays an egg, right? If we come in here, we know, where is it? we have an entity or a component on here called spawn entity. And this is saying the minimum amount of time that has to pass before it happens and the maximum time, and it'll be somewhere random. The sound we want to play when the new entity is spawned, what the item is, and then this is just some filters. So this is basically saying if there's somebody riding the chicken, so rider count of the current self, which is myself, this particular chicken, is equal to 0. So it basically says that we can't lay an egg if we have a rider. So if we take this component and we move it over to our pig, and we can just drop it in anywhere in that components section. We're gonna change this so that we can see it happen a little faster. And we're gonna remove the filters because we're really not worried about riders. Okay. Now we go back into our world and see whether we have egg-laying pigs. Oh, I already picked it up. Now, the fun part about all of this is we're not just restricted to eggs, right? If we remember, we looked at this, it asks us what item we want to spawn. So we could change this and say that we want to spawn a diamond sword. And we go back into the game. And now this is very important because we get to have a lot of fun modifying all these JSON files, but this is how you're going to interact with the game, how you're going to create entities, how you're going to tell the game it's going to behave. We already see it. Diamond swords everywhere. Every time I do this, I get a kick out of it. So, and also as you get better at JSON, this is the same way you're going to define variables and objects and arrays inside your JavaScript when we start introducing custom behavior using functions. And like I said, this is going to be a weekly series where we're going to keep building on this until we get to the point where we've got the foundation, and then let's invent an add-on, and every week we'll work on it. So I'm going to remove this. And now we need to get to the fun stuff. So, what about an exploding pig? Anybody interested in watching a pig explode? So we could look at our creeper inside our vanilla behavior pack for an idea of how this works. And I think at first this is going to be the best way to kind of understand things. So we can see that it has a component group called exploding. And inside that, we just have one component. That means when we apply the exploding component group to our entity, it's going to get this component. So we could put this directly in our list of components inside of our pig. That's our events. But then what would happen? It would explode almost immediately, and that's not really what we want. So we're going to do a similar thing. We're going to create a component group. We'll just borrow all of this, and we can drop it this section right here because we see components. So yes, so right now for this particular stream, we are going through kind of modifying existing items and entities by using the vanilla behavior pack. Now, you could create your own. If you came up here and you named it anything else, you would have your own pig in the game. And then probably the next stream, so next week, we'll talk about how to change the way things look. So if we want to create our own visual entity or block or things like that. And this one, we're kind of just talking about changing behaviors, and you'd be able to apply all of this to your new entity or item. So if we go into components here, I'm sorry, component groups, this is the bottom of it. We can add our exploding component. Oops. Now, we have a couple things we need to figure out from here. So we have a component group, but now we need to be able to add that to our entity. And how do we do that? So what we need to do is we actually need to create an event. So down at the very bottom, you can see we have this events, and sometimes it can be hard to catch. I recommend just searching. So inside here, you see we have a key, which is the event, and then we have a couple of properties. So the property here is saying we want to remove no component groups, and we want to add this list of component groups. And so to kind of understand that, we can look at when it grows up, right? We saw that there was a pig baby component group and an adult component group. So when that grow up event is triggered, we remove all of the components that are associated with a pig baby, and we add all of the ones associated with an adult and an unsaddled one. So we're just going to go ahead and add one at the top here, and we can just copy all of this. And now if you're using here, you can actually click these to kind of find where the matching bracket is. Do you see how that's highlighted? And that's kind of how we'll know that we have this whole section. So we can copy that, paste it in here, and we're just going to call it explode pig. We're going to remove no component groups, and then we're going to add our exploding component group. So now when the explode pig event is fired on us, we're going to add this exploding component group. That exploding component group is going to add the explode. Where is it? The explode component. And then we have a 1.5 second fuse. And I think we should amp this up a little bit. I think that it should cause fire. And I think it should be a ridiculously big explosion. So now we have kind of this way of, okay, when an event is fired, how do we get our thing to explode? But we haven't looked at how we get our event to fire. So if we look in the documentation, we can actually find that there are components for onHurt by player. And inside here, we can see there's a property that says what event we should trigger, whether there's any filters, and the target. And because the default value is self, we don't even really need to supply that. We're not going to have any filters. So it looks like we just need to supply our event. So we're just going to go into our components here. We'll add one at the top. On hurt by player. We need our colon. And then we need the comma here because for the one below it to separate them. And then it looks like we need a key for event. So our event we called it Minecraft. There you go. Now you see this autocomplete helper here. Explode pig. Now that Minecraft colon here, we don't technically need that. And really, we probably should not call ours that. We just called it explode pig. I should probably put something, a unique thing in front of it so that it doesn't get confused with events in the system that are called something else, or that are called the same thing. The same way we see like on the pig, we see that Minecraft. And Oh, I need to update my, here we go, because I renamed it to Eric Explode Pig. So now, in theory, when we hurt the pig, it should explode. As long as I didn't miss anything. Oh, I forgot I made it run away really fast. The whole world's burning. I forgot I made it run away really fast. Okay, so we've got our exploding pig. Kind of to finish things up, I think that, and please ask questions if you have them. So our pig is exploding and ruining the world. And I think we've been unfair to our pig. So wait, let me change that. I know that I set it to 125. Yeah, let's put the panic back. Okay, we've been rather unfair to our pig. Yeah, I can share these code snippets. This is all going to be archived to YouTube too. I'll slice this up and put it on YouTube so you can go back through and you can ask questions. And if there are things that you want me to do, like provide you this JSON file after I've modified it, I can definitely put a zip file or a GitHub repository or something up where we can all grab these. But we're going to keep working on this. So this is all kind of foundational stuff to understand how the programming interface between us and Minecraft works on both behaviors and the way things look. Once we get that, I would love input from everybody about an add-on, and we'll make one up, and I will get on every week and we'll just work on adding features until it's done, whether that takes us a month or a year, and then we'll be able to kind of grow together doing this. So we've been rather unfair to our pig. And one other thing I wanted all of you to look at is recipes. So we can look at recipes. They're defined using this sort of same JSON format. We've got our version so that the code that's interpreting this knows which things to look for. This is a special property that says what type of recipe it is. And you can look this up on the documentation here too. If we go back, we can see recipes. So we've got shaped recipes and shapeless recipes, and we can kind of see some examples. So we want a shaped recipe. And the way this works is we have an identifier which uniquely identifies our recipe. The tags, inside this tags, the fact that the crafting table is there is telling the game that this has to be created on a crafting table. The pattern is actually a really interesting way of defining this. It's kind of creative. We have an array, which means a list of things. And inside that array, we have 3 strings. Now, these strings can be 3 characters long. In this particular case, we just have this. So the way this would work is if you needed this to be defined in just the middle blocks, we would put spaces around it. So this is saying the sides have nothing in it. But because we had those no spaces in there, it doesn't really matter where you line them up. Like, we understand how kind of creating an arrow works. It doesn't matter where in the line we do as long as they're stacked. So that's what that's for. And we could look at something, say like an anvil, and that'll show us, right? We have our iron blocks up top, and we have our iron ingot down, and then we have to have an iron ingot in the middle. So these letters can be numbers, letters. We could make it a hashtag. It doesn't really matter what you want it to be. They're just kind of placeholders. Now, what tells the game what goes there is the next property, and that's called key. And inside of that, we have multiple things. So in here, we're defining what I means. So it's basically saying when you're looking at this recipe and you see an I, it's meant to be an iron block. When you see a lowercase I, it's meant to be an iron ingot. And then our next property is result, and that's what we're going to get. This data attribute is interesting. So there are certain items that are actually, that can represent many things. An example would be a spawn egg. Well, a spawn egg is very generic. What does it spawn? And that's going to be what this data attribute is used for, is to specify which one. Another thing that's not shown in this particular recipe is there is a count attribute. So if it's stackable, you can supply how many this recipe should produce. So knowing all of that, let's now take this and try to remedy all of the harm that we have done to our pigs. So we're going to come back up out of the vanilla behavior pack and into our mod. And we're going to come in here to recipes and create a pig.json. Paste that in there. I'm just going to call this pig. And for fun, we're just going to change this to P's for pork chops. Actually, let's make it look like a pig. Here's its body. That's its head. There's its legs. We're only going to have one thing that we need to use. So we need to tell it what our P is. And in this case, it is a pork chop. And we want a spawn egg. Now, remember, I just said the spawn egg is generic. We need to be able to tell the game which spawn egg we want. And there's actually a useful site for this. I have the link for it here. And I will paste that into the chat for everybody. Now, if we pull up that link, we can come down here and we can see kind of the namespace IDs and all of this stuff and data for what we're creating. I'm just going to go ahead and search until we find it. So here we can see that the data value for our pig is 12. So if we come back in here and we change this to a 12, we should get a pig spawn egg. And if we come back in here and go into our world, I didn't change our loot tables so that we would get, wow, we made a mess here, didn't we? I didn't change our loot table so that we get pork chops. So I'm just going to give myself some pork chops. Oh, and I can't type. Pork. There we go. And we want, I don't know, 10 of them. Okay. Oh, we also need a crafting table. Okay. So let's lay our crafting table down and come over here and take our pork chops, and we've got our head, our body, our legs. And would you look at that? We've got a pig spawn egg. And now we can sit here and spawn pigs. Okay. Now that's probably, we're at roughly an hour here. That's probably a good stopping point for today. We could look at some of the spawn rules and trading rules and things like that. But what I'd love to do is we kind of move through stuff pretty quickly. So what I'd love to do is kind of open it up to questions, and we can kind of walk back through files and I can explain anything that I did, or maybe give you some links to understand concepts a little better. And then kind of next week, we'll look at resource packs and how we can do things like this. So there is a free program called BlockBench. And once it opens, we'll put it over here. We can, this is from the vanilla resource pack. We could just pull in something like a chicken. And we can look at the model itself, kind of the components that make it up. We could click on this and we could adjust the chicken's arms up. We could give the chicken 2 heads, and we could export that. And so that's sort of like a preview of what we'll probably look at next week, along with kind of particle effects and animations. And then we can move into the fact that we have inside of our entities, these are our recipes. Let's close these out. Close this out. Close this out. We had looked inside of our entities and we had kind of all of these components, but now what if we wanted to introduce behavior that doesn't exist? There isn't a component to tell it to do something. We'll start looking at creating our own functions, and we can introduce things like tell me when somebody enters the world and maybe something will happen. It puts them on a scoreboard or something. We can start getting super, super creative with what we do, because we're not just limited by what's you're exposed to. However, there are really, really interesting things you could do, right? Like you could invent new creatures just knowing this. You know, we could create teleporting chickens that just teleport all over the place, you know. Kind of it's limitless. So with everything that I've showed everybody for today, do we have questions? I know it kind of moves fast, and I really want to make sure that this is approachable for everybody, because I know a lot of content that's out there kind of assumes that you already have a lot of knowledge on this. And it's been a number of years since I started programming, so I probably make false assumptions about what's easily grasped. Is there anything we want to make something do really quick before I end the stream? Okay, well, awesome, everybody. I mean, thanks for joining me. Feel free to subscribe to me on YouTube and ask questions, and I'll use that to kind of adapt what the future weeks we work on, if there are things that people are struggling with. If not, next week we'll start looking at how do we create a new entity or item and the way it looks and behaves and animates. We'll try to get through as much of that. And then after we do that, let's invent an entirely new entity from start to finish, what it looks like, how it behaves. Thanks, everybody. And we'll be on next week. This will be archived to YouTube if you didn't catch all of it. It may take me a couple days. It's actually probably short enough I can upload it, but it may take me a day or two to drop it on YouTube, but it will be archived there. Thanks, everybody. And for anybody who wants to join next week, I'll see you next week.